Okay, I think we'll kick off. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the second of the Infrastructure Sustainability Council of Australia and Roads Australia partnership webinars, where we're exploring resilience in an integrated network. I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respect to elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to welcome all of you and thank you for attending. And I'm going to pass over to Marko Misko, our moderator for today, who is a partner at HWL and also a board member for both Infrastructure Sustainability Council as well as Roads Australia. Marko, over to you.
Patrick, thank you very, very much, and thank you for doing the acknowledgement to country and our First Nations people. Highly critical, so very, very important. Thank you very, very much. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you very, very much for joining us on what is an absolutely stunning day, at least here in Melbourne. And that's the amazing thing that I think webinars have brought, that we are able now to connect around the country with people everywhere. So at least in Melbourne, it's a stunning day. Welcome. Thank you very, very much for joining us for what I'm sure you'll agree is an absolutely critical topic. Just quickly to introduce myself, I am the moderator for today. I am a board member of ISCA. I'm also a board member of Roads Australia and one of the two vice presidents, and I chair the sustainability chapter there. In my spare time, I'm also a partner within the National Construction and Infrastructure team at HWL Ebsworth. So let me welcome panellists. Thank you very, very much for joining us. I will introduce you at the relevant times over the course of this morning. Quick outline of the event proceedings today, and we are going to stick to time. We've got 1 hour. So the first thing is, this is a continuation of what is becoming a very, very exciting and productive partnership between Roads Australia and ISCA. Obviously, from my perspective, wearing both hats, I'm very, very excited about this. I think it's an opportunity for the members of RA and ISCA to, in this instance, focus on resilience, a critical issue in an integrated network, and the challenges and opportunities that we know exist. Thank you again to our panellists who bring vast experience to today's discussions and will give us a unique perspective on the zeitgeist. Speaking of which, 2020, the year that put force majeure back on the map. No doubt about that. Sorry about that. So obviously, given the events of the end of last year and now this year, we are even more focused, as we should be, on the sorts of extreme events that can impact on our community and on our infrastructure. And it really underscores just how critical that infrastructure is. And the fact that we need to not just think about and talk about, but we really need to work out how we can, to the maximum extent possible, effectively and in a real way, mitigate the effect of these sorts of events and optimise the resilience and sustainability of our infrastructure in planning it, designing and constructing it, operating and maintaining it, and financing and funding it. So, enough about me. Just to tell you what the format's going to be for this webinar. There'll be a short presentation from Rebecca McPhee, then there'll be a set of questions directed at the panel, and then that will be followed by a more open Q&A format for everyone. There'll be a Q&A session to follow the presentation. Questions are encouraged. This works best when you do ask questions, and they can be raised via the Q&A function or via the chat function at the bottom of your screen. We'll also be doing a quick poll, which may be on your screens now. Patrick, I think that's right. I may have that wrong. It's quite simple. Just select your response to the question and then we will collate the responses to that poll. Okay, so let's move on and let me introduce our speaker, Rebecca McPhee, Deputy CEO, Sydney Metro. Rebecca's responsible for providing leadership and direction for the operational management, future development, placemaking, I love that phrase and that concept and planning activities of Sydney Metro. For those of you that may not know, Sydney Metro is Australia's biggest transport infrastructure program. Prior to that role, Rebecca held several ED, Executive Director roles at Transport for New South Wales, providing commercial capability to support high-value, complex projects and service models, and managing a portfolio of all of the bus, light rail and ferry contracts around the state. So please join me in making Rebecca welcome. Thank you, Rebecca.
No, I did it again. Thank you, Marko, for that introduction. I am now off mute. Just a little bit more background on Sydney Metro. So as Marko says, Australia's largest public transport project. But we actually started some operations last year. So if I can get the next slide, fantastic, yeah. So we actually started operations last year in the Salt City's northwest on May last year on Australia's first fully automated passenger railway. We've had more than 20 million journeys on that network, and we're currently at a customer satisfaction rating of 96%, which is absolutely fantastic. From the northwest, Metro Rail is currently being extended under Sydney Harbour through the new underground city stations and beyond to the southwest. In 2024, when that system opens, Sydney will have 31 Metro railway stations and 66 kilometres of standalone metro system. No, we haven't stopped there. In October last year, the government announced Sydney Metro West, which will link Greater Parramatta with the Sydney CBD. The first environmental impact for that project comes off exhibition this evening. And last but certainly not least, Metro Western Sydney Airport will service Greater Western Sydney and the new Western Sydney International Nancy Bird Walton Airport. For some broader context, given that the topic for today is an integrated network, Sydney Metro is part of the Greater Sydney Division within the Transport Cluster, led by our Deputy Secretary Elizabeth Mildwater, and designed as one of two customer-facing divisions launched on the 1st of July last year. The whole purpose of having that Greater Sydney Division is to integrate transport modes so that we can deliver better services, infrastructure and places to better meet the unique transport needs of those communities across the Eastern Harbour, Central River and Western Parkland cities. So what is Sydney Metro's current approach to resilience in an integrated network? And how do we plan, build and design for extreme events? Next slide, please, if I may. Thank you. As a result of climate change, we all know we're going to experience more extreme weather events more frequently. Those extreme weather events have the potential to damage our assets, impact the health, safety and well-being of our customers and staff, and disrupt the service which our communities rely on to get to work, school and go about their day-to-day business. With the significant investment of taxpayers' money being made in Sydney Metro, we're really aware of our responsibility to ensure that we're making the network as resilient as we can to these events, both in the way that we plan, design and build it, but also how we operate it, noting all of the interdependencies which contribute to a resilient network. The New South Wales Government and Transport for New South Wales have been really clear in their commitment to resilience. I think it's a strong theme that comes across through in key strategies and plans like Future Transport 2056, the Greater Sydney Regional Plan and District Plans, the State Infrastructure Strategy, and of course the State and Premier's priorities. One of the reasons I'm so excited to be speaking today is I think it's a recognition that Sydney Metro is a leader in this field. We've been really actively considering resilience and the impacts of climate change since the early planning began for Metro North West in 2011 as part of our broader sustainability programme within the organisation. A key to our success in this area has been collaboration and sharing of information with our key delivery partners and ISCA, and the support provided to us by ISCA. This was particularly important in the early stages of our projects when planning for climate change was just starting to be done on infrastructure projects here in Australia. From the outset, we've aligned our sustainability requirements with best practice and set a really high bar for our projects, which aligns to our vision to transform Sydney to a world-class metro. We really mean world-class. Our delivery partners and contractors have really embraced that challenge and delivered some great environmental and social outcomes and innovations. That's led to Sydney Metro North West programme of works being awarded a leading infrastructure sustainability rating by ISCA in 2019. And more recently, the City and South West Tunnelling Project was awarded the highest ever IS design rating by ISCA at 100 points. The photo here is of our 1.1 megawatt solar array on the roof of our train maintenance facility in Rouse Hill. If you'd like to find out any more about the sustainability programme, there's a huge amount on our website. So, how do we go about delivering these great outcomes? Well, as with everything, the process is quite simple. First, it's about understanding the key potential hazards. Those most relevant to Sydney Metro are shown here on the left. And of course, the potential impacts that those hazards might have on our customers, staff, assets, financial sustainability, and of course, the reputation of Sydney Metro and the broader New South Wales government. We undertake these initial climate change risk assessments at the business case stage of our project, so really early before government's even made an investment decision. And we progressively update them through the design and construction and into operations. It's absolutely critical to us that we undertake those assessments with our key stakeholders so that we're taking a more integrated network approach. And we address the risks as early as possible in the process as well, designing out risks where feasible, including those requirements and specifications in our key contracts, and planning for the management of residual risks during the operations and maintenance phase. So some details of what that actually means in practice. This slide shows some of the resilience measures which we've built into the design of our northwest stations. Those include structures that are designed to deal with increased wind, hail, extreme heat and cold, and UV exposure. Flood modelling, so drainage is constructed to account not just for the current state, but for likely climate change impacts. We've got in-ground irrigation activated by the moisture level in the soil, and we use vegetation to reduce the urban heat island effect. Another example of a design initiative is included ensuring that the future sea level risk and storm surge are considered for our new station at Barangaroo. We aren't resting on our laurels either. We want to make sure that what we do for Metro West and Western Sydney Airport is better than the approach that we took back in 2012 for Northwest. So if I can get a couple of slides on, please. Thanks. So we recently undertook a review of our approach to climate change. It involved a review of our risk assessments to identify potential gaps, an interdependency workshop, and the development of a recommended resilience roadmap. That sets out a number of key actions and recommendations for us to improve in the area of resilience. Some of the key actions I think are worth calling out are advocating resilience, which speaks to integrating consideration of resilience right across our business and our projects. Safe in place, which is all about understanding how we can best work with other agencies to support customers in the event of an extreme event occurring. Interdependent systems. This one's really important and is obviously the topic for today. It's about collaborating to understand and manage interdependencies. So for example, with electricity and telecommunication providers, and of course other parts of the transport network. And finally, connected communities, which speaks to our role in enhancing the resilience of the communities we serve. So for instance, by providing more shade and shelter and improving accessibility. At the moment, we're reviewing how best to implement those actions. This next diagram speaks to one of our areas of focus about making sure that we have a complete picture of those interrelationships and dependencies, which underpin how we can best plan for and recover from extreme events. And of course, how we can contribute to Sydney's broader resilience. This is an example mapping out the interrelated impacts of a scenario where we would experience an extreme East Coast low. So looking forwards, we've already commenced stakeholder workshops on the Western Sydney Airport project with representatives from the Commonwealth, state and local governments, utilities and communication service providers, so that we can fully identify risks and collaborate on the best way to mitigate those. Western Sydney already experiences extreme heat, and we know heat waves will become longer and more frequent in the future. Our new project will look at how we can best contribute to urban cooling through obviously integration of more tree canopy, but also landscaping and shade for the benefit of customers, the community and our own infrastructure. Flooding is also a key consideration in the Western Parkland City. As this area evolves from paddocks to pavement, flood characteristics will change. The current design accounts for increased rainfall intensity, but planning with adjacent stakeholders will be important to manage the impacts. Extreme weather events will pose increasingly frequent challenges to our operations, customers and community. Sydney Metro already has a robust process in place, I believe, to enhance the resilience of our infrastructure and services, but we can always improve. And our experience is showing that while designing in a response and augmenting management procedures is a good approach, achieving overall resilience is really a complex puzzle that can be easier solved by early and ongoing engagement with a range of stakeholders. And as part of an integrated network, we're partners with others. And while this picture is more about reducing our contribution to climate change than dealing with the impacts of it, I thought you might be interested to see where we offset our operational power. This 95 megawatt solar farm, affectionately known as Beryl, is just outside Mudgee and has been offsetting 100% of the emissions from our operations electricity for the last year. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was absolutely outstanding. Brilliant. It's wonderful to hear about these things and not just lip service, but the way the, to use the phrase, rubber actually hits the road. So that's been outstanding. We'll hopefully tease out a few of those issues in the next session when we have the panel discussion and the Q&A. So again, thank you. Let me now move to introduce the panellists. We have two other panellists apart from you, Rebecca, Michael and Claire. Let me introduce each of them. So firstly, Michael Kilgariff. He's the CEO of Roads Australia. And as we know, the peak body for roads within an integrated transport system, and that's absolutely critical as a policy issue here in Australia. Michael has a keen understanding of the major economic, social and government policy drivers to achieve a robust integrated system for people and for freight. Claire's the head of strategy, planning and innovation, Infrastructure New South Wales, where she provides advice to the Premier on economic and regulatory impediments to the efficient delivery of infrastructure projects, appropriate funding models, and Claire coordinates infrastructure submissions to the Commonwealth Government and oversees the preparation of the 20-year state infrastructure strategy and 5-year infrastructure plans. So for the next 15 or 20 minutes or so, let's move to panel discussions. I'll start with a couple of facilitated questions, and after that we'll move to a broader Q&A. So Claire, I might start with one for you. So as we know, the recent bushfires across the country highlighted many significant challenges and gaps in our infrastructure network. Amazing if you think about it in the context of a country that is so prone to fire and has always been. In any event, what are your views on the key gaps and what action is Infrastructure New South Wales taking to start addressing these? Over to you, Claire.
Thanks, Marko, and thanks to Rebecca for that great presentation. It's amazing to see how such a huge investment in government funding is being rolled out with such a strong emphasis on sustainability and resilience, and the best practice modelling that's happening, that's really a landmark for the rest of the country and the world. So well done to the Metro team. I think, and I went down and had a look at some of the impacts of the bushfires in southern parts of New South Wales, and what really hit me, the impacts for local government, and that is a real issue that is important, we know, for Infrastructure New South Wales to address, and the New South Wales government going forward. You'll know that recently Resilience New South Wales was created as a new entity in the Department of Premier and Cabinet. So we're now in the same cluster, and that's a demonstration from the Premier about the importance of resilience being an absolutely key priority for her going forward. And she's now asked for Infrastructure New South Wales to review the state infrastructure strategy with a real focus now on resilience and sustainability on the back of the floods and the bushfires that have occurred in recent times. So there is a genuine identification across government on the need for a coordinated effort, and that's the unique role that Infrastructure New South Wales can play across government in addressing assessment of need. And it's one thing for Rebecca to be doing amazing work for new infrastructure, but we have got billions of dollars worth of residual infrastructure that has not been well maintained for a long time, and that's a huge challenge for us going forward in how we think about how we create sustainability with that existing infrastructure.
Excellent, Claire. Thank you very, very much. I might open up with you, Michael. I'll open up one for you. So, Michael, what are some of the policy measures governments can implement in conjunction with the industry that will facilitate greater resilience in road, rail and other transport infrastructure?
Well, this is probably my 24th or 25th webinar, and there's always someone who still starts talking without unmuting themselves, and today it was me. So thanks, Marko, and thanks, Rebecca and Claire. What a year 2020's been. Started off with bushfires, then we went to floods, then we got hit by COVID-19. So when we talk about resilience of infrastructure, I think 2020 is definitely going to be a year that we refer back to as being a bit of a benchmark, probably not in a good way. So what I'm going to do today is just actually cover three issues. One is the circular economy, use of recycled materials. The second one is use of technology, and the third one I'm going to cover off is resilience in our freight supply chains, which is very much one that I guess bubbled to the surface over COVID-19. So the first one being the circular economy, given I'm talking about policy issues. Some of you would be aware that the Transport and Infrastructure Council, which is federal and state territory transport and infrastructure ministers, has got this on the agenda. They want to support the COAG waste export ban and the National Waste Action Plan. So they've delegated Austroads to go off and develop a number of guidelines that they will bring back to the forum later in the year. But it's important to remember that transport infrastructure is not the solution to our recycled issues. And so roads are not alternative sites for recyclable waste. So there's lots of trials underway with tyres, for example. How much rubber can we use in roads? WA actually has a good program underway, but perversely they were actually importing rubber to use in their roads due to the lack of local supply. In plastics, a lot of local government trials. Mixed polymer roads are certainly a bit of a feature now. However, I guess the issue there is that mixing other materials in with asphalt actually reduces the opportunity for that asphalt to be subsequently recycled down the road. The paradox also is that raw plastic is very cheap, recycled is very expensive. So the economics are nowhere near stacking up at this time. And glass, of course, the impurities that you often get in glass often react with some materials in the asphalt to basically degrade the road over time. So moving on to technology, of course, as a population, technology involves technology resilience and redundancy will become more important. And of course, those towers that support the 5G network are going to be increasingly critical in the future because, of course, cabs and vehicles over time are going to rely on it more. One of the other things that I wanted to raise was the role of what we call the Australian Building Information Modelling Strategic Framework, and that's a process that begins with the creation of intelligent 3D model to enable document management over the course of construction and then operation. Now, this has actually been endorsed as a national focus by the Board of Treasurers in August 2019 to standardise approaches to the use of what we call BIM over the national infrastructure framework. There has been no consistent policy framework in the past. We're looking for one now. Now, what that will do from a maintenance perspective or a resilience perspective is that it will enable BIM data to be used in the operation and maintenance of infrastructure. And so what we can do is actually get better condition monitoring and predictive maintenance, which will obviously drive greater efficiencies and a longer life for infrastructure. So that will be certainly a policy issue that we'll be pushing quite hard for. The last one being resilience in freight supply chains. COVID-19, of course, really raised the focus on our supply chains and their resilience. And an interesting lesson, I think, coming out of that is that from a supply chain perspective, we're moving from a just-in-time to a just-in-case perspective. Probably not widely known that March was actually the biggest demand for freight and logistics that Australia has ever seen. Bigger even than Christmas, and of course driven by people's focus on panic buying and hoarding. Humans are interesting things, or interesting to the extent that Victoria, of course, we've now spiked again in our COVID-19 cases, which has driven another round of panic buying and hoarding. So, of course, the logistics and freight industry is going to have to relate to that. Now, what that means, of course, is that we need to make sure that we've got the right infrastructure in place and capacity to actually deal with that. And I guess from a rail perspective, it's important that we make sure that rail is an important part of our freight logistics system, given the fact that it's impossible to make sure that when we have these spikes that we can actually put enough trucks on the road at any given time. And it's also important to make sure that we have efficient port linkages to go along with that rail. And I draw your attention to an announcement this week in Sydney at Moorebank, where they've signed a deal with Woolworths for 26 hectares of warehousing. And that, of course, will give them a connection to both the Port Botany and interstate network. And of course, eventually that will mean that there'll be automated trains between Moorebank all the way to and from Port Botany. And of course, stevedore operations are also becoming increasingly automated. So look, I can see that I'm probably going a bit over time here, Marko. So I'll draw this to a close just by saying that over COVID-19, it really did draw attention to the fact that people, I guess, over a pandemic, there can be a shortage of them. So it's important to make sure that supply chains are automated as much as possible, and that national and state governments have I guess, a collaborative approach to our freight and logistics sector. And I guess one of the ways we can do that is by developing a national freight and logistics supply chain strategy.
Michael, thank you very much for that comprehensive answer to the question. You did go over, but can I tell you what, I didn't gong you because that was all bloody good oil. You raised many, many really, really good points. So let's move on to the next question, which I'll throw open to all of you, but maybe Rebecca to you first, because of course we heard from you about the best practice, which you're actually adopting, not just talking about on Sydney Metro, which is great. The flex and actions being undertaken at the planning stage and gaps that exist. So I'll throw this to all of you, but Rebecca, if you can start. So what are the steps that you need to take? And you talked about this to some extent, to move from identification of gaps and discussion, talking, into actually delivering strong, resilient, integrated transport networks and infrastructure that can face these increasingly common extreme events.
Yeah, thanks, Marko. So from an integrated transport network perspective, in terms of operations, I actually do believe that the bringing together of Sydney's transport modes into a single Greater Sydney division is a really good step in the right direction. It means we're a lot more coordinated and motivated to work with each other to get the best overall outcome for our customers and communities. And, we're seeing more sharing of information and experiences of what's worked and what hasn't, as well as opportunities for improvement. After the heavy rainfall and flooding events in February, I think that was really, really evident to me. For a new transport infrastructure like ours, clearly I talked about how we're planning on building resilience now, but as a network, we're only as strong as our weakest link. So we really do need to focus on those now, on those areas of vulnerability. And I do think I'm going to go back to the 4 action items that I talked about in my presentation, because I think it's really important. First is to integrate resilience into decision-making, and it's certainly investment decision-making right through the program lifecycle. It's not something, as Claire mentioned, you can fix after the fact. You've got to be there early doors. The next is around us collaborating better with combat agencies. So when emergencies do happen, how are we best meeting the needs of our customers and getting them around? The next, and I would say this is one of the most important, is about relationship stakeholders, getting a diverse set of views into understanding those critical systems interdependencies. And then the last is really around community for me. We do more than provide a transport network. We actually support the lives of our communities. And I also think that our experience with COVID has shown that as a state, we can really rise to these kinds of challenges. And I think we've got a really good opportunity now to draw on some of that experience and also some of the innovations that are coming out to start to plug some of those gaps in achieving resilience.
Brilliant, Rebecca. Thank you very, very much. Claire, Michael, what about you?
Thanks, Marko. Look, I think one of the key areas that Infrastructure New South Wales is really investing in at the moment, and this is on the back of the bushfire recovery, we played a key role across government in coordinating the response. And step one for us was about collecting whole of government data around all of the infrastructure assets across the layers of government that were impacted by the bushfires. So we actually got some really good starting point data using consistent fields. I know this is really boring stuff, but trying to get some standards in place where we can actually get some proper assessment across the different types of portfolios, the different types of infrastructure, and some very strong asset management processes in place so that in our advice to government, that's part of the way forward. Engage with the community and really demonstrating that we understand the impact of that, of these issues. So as we develop our new state infrastructure strategy for 2022, we're looking at both human-induced and natural hazards. And so it provides us with an opportunity to think about COVID, but also cybersecurity issues that are starting to emerge. And that demonstrates the interrelationship between different types of hazards and the interdependencies. And it's really those issues that become the unstuck areas. So when you've got flood on the back of a bushfire, that's really where a lot of the road damage happened in southern New South Wales. We know we've got to think about, well, what's the impact of technology as a result of COVID and working from home. So there are interdependencies across different types of hazards, and having this opportunity to make sure that we have this coordinated approach across different sectors, across different parts of government in a very well planned out way. And that's really what we're going to try and achieve.
Claire, so many good points.
Sorry, Marko, you're going.
Oh, no, you go, Michael. That's fine.
Look, I was just going to say that for me, I think one of the significant policy issues that really has happened over the course of this year in particular is that while the debate has been underway for some time about the fact that we can't really consider transport modes in isolation from each other, and that it's really about an integrated transport system, a multimodal approach. I guess over the bushfires, the floods, and now COVID, that's provided a practical example as to why it's so important. And I think one of the great positives that has come out of this year is the fact that I think the level of collaboration that we're getting across the federal and state government is probably the best it's ever been. And that's certainly the view that we're getting back from both the Commonwealth and state ministers, and the establishment of the National Cabinet and the policy issues that are going to be addressed under that are going to be one of the great positives that will come out of this COVID crisis.
No, I agree, Michael. I agree. I just wanted to go back to one point, sorry, that Claire made, which was, it's interesting, isn't it? If we think where we're at in 2020, and we've had this mix of the, something old, something new, because the bushfires are definitely old. They've existed since the dawn of time in Australia, as we know. But then, if you spoke to someone a couple of years ago, and not that lawyers are always the barometer, but if you talked about drafting a force majeure clause, and someone says, oh, what about pandemics? Oh, yeah, look, I wouldn't really worry about that. Whereas, now everyone has been hurtling straight to their force majeure definitions and force majeure clauses to look at whether they stack up and whether something like COVID-19 is in there. So it really goes to show just how you need to have that resilience, not just in the assets themselves, Michael, as you said, but the supply chains that which then circles back into the assets, the ports, the intermodals, etc., etc. So you've got that resilience to be able to respond to new hazards, as you say, that we might not necessarily have thought of or have thought of sufficiently.
So look, this is where the scenario planning is so important. When Future Transport was developed, we did a lot of scenario planning around extreme situations. And in fact, some of that planning is being used because we looked at a scenario of a significant disruption to the use of public transport. And that's been able to be used through COVID. And so this is a really good example through strategic planning to think about the different types of scenarios and the interdependencies and the interrelationships that occur across the transport network, so that we know that when the roads are flooded, other modes are going to have to crack in and really support the network and make sure that the communities are getting their needs met. And that communication back to the community is the sort of communication that's linked up, and that, you know, that means across borders. So there are so many learnings that have happened as a result of COVID on the back of the bushfires and the floods. And then, you know, all of this following the drought, you know, there's so many things that we're going to pick up to make sure that we address those issues.
Yeah, excellent. Excellent. Now, thank you for your responses so far. Questions coming in, which is excellent, and I want to pay due respect to those. So let me start with one for Rebecca from Chris Weston. What kind of collaboration initiatives have emerged by working with the interdependent telcos, energy, and other providers regarding adaptation and or resilience? And Rebecca, I think you did touch on this. You talked about, I think, utilities in your initial presentation. So it'd be great to get an answer to that.
Yeah, sure, no problems. So look, we're in Sydney Metro, we're in really early stages of discussions. For electricity suppliers, it's really been about understanding what backup and redundancy arrangements are in place and where some of their vulnerabilities are, where some of ours are as well. If you don't mind, I wouldn't, given we're talking about integrated networks, I'll also talk a little bit about something we were doing when I was responsible for the bus services across the state. We worked really closely at that stage. We had discussions with Transgrid around, because we were looking to roll out, what might the rollout of electric buses look like? And clearly we were looking from an operational perspective, depot space, the most optimal routes to run those electric buses. But in those discussions with Transgrid, we actually realised that there were constraints around that electricity supply that actually might drive the answer as much as the operational capability of a bus. So I think having those conversations just gives you a different outlook on what you're trying to achieve in resilience.
Interesting perspective. Thank you. So I'll keep going because we're getting lots of great questions, which is excellent. So, and people are putting their names to them, which is really, really nice. So one from Priya Path Manatam. What emission pathways and periods has Transport for New South Wales set for their infrastructure projects? What does the panel think of the use of RCP 8.5 as a pathway, which translates to a future incompatible with human civilization as we know it? Great question. Thank you, Priya. Who wants to start with that?
I'll be brave.
Do it, Claire.
So look, I guess the key thing for me is the reason we're revising the state infrastructure strategy is because we've had such a disruption to our environment and our systems that we need to rebaseline. We need to rethink our data. We need to look at different types of projections for the future. And that's exactly what we're going to do over the next few months, is actually work across government to make sure that we're rethinking what the projections look like for the future as a result of the new scenarios that are emerging. And that is going to require us to rebaseline our thinking, to rebaseline what's been a priority for government in the past and where our real vulnerabilities are and our risks are. So I think the key answer to this question is, how open is government really to rethinking, accepting that we need to have a very open mind about what the future is going to hold, because who would have thought 6 months ago we would be where we are right now? And so we have an opportunity here to push ahead in a way that we've never done before, with thinking through what the future projections might hold over the next 5, 10 and 20 years, and make sure we're positioned in a way that we've never been able to be before.
Marko, I'm not going to comment on its compatibility with human civilization, but in a sense of building resilience.
You don't want to touch that existential point?
I won't touch that point, but we are using RCP 8.5 as a pathway, as a forecast for our worst case scenarios, so that we're certain that we're building in the right level of resilience.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I might move on to another question from David Carberry. And so this is, if I can just go back to it, COVID-19. So given the economic impacts associated with COVID-19, do you, the panellists, see governments shifting their planning and expenditure on infrastructure sustainability and resilience to simply pushing more projects out the door to stimulate employment? Fair question.
Actually, I could just quickly lead off, if you like, on that, Marko. Look, it's obvious to most, at least, that transport infrastructure, the government's view of transport infrastructure is that it does deliver a pretty quick and good return on investment. And that's why there has been, especially over the last couple of weeks, some fairly serious money put into what they call shovel-ready projects. That,
don't use that phrase. I hate that phrase.
I know. Look, it's one that just came to the top of my head. But a lot of that's focused around regional roads, and it's things that small and mid-tier contractors can easily pick up and get underway quite quickly. And so it does actually have quite a good road safety return on investment. But look, I think it is quite important that as we're rolling this money out the door, that we do actually still have some sort of an economic context that we actually put the expenditure in, and that we're not really just building, for want of a better analogy, school halls for schools that don't need them.
Indeed, going back to a stimulus from a number of years ago.
So Marko, I just might follow up on that, because there's been a lot of work being done in recent months in Infrastructure New South Wales across the whole of government, and in collaboration with the Commonwealth and with other jurisdictions, to look at the pipeline of projects that we've got ahead of us. And there's already a commitment of $100 billion worth of infrastructure projects in New South Wales that have gone through a rigorous prioritisation process. And so what we are doing, and everyone will have seen this through the media, is looking at how can we unblock these projects and make sure that we can accelerate the ones that government's already committed to create the jobs that we want to create across the whole of the network. We're looking at the whole supply chain, we're looking at all different industries, we're looking at all different employment sectors, and we want to make sure that we can address these effectively. But the first priority is, let's see what jobs we can create by accelerating the projects that government's already committed to. And then in addition to that, we're looking at, well, where else can we create jobs that are no lost jobs, but an opportunity to target those areas where we know in particular parts of the country or in particular sectors that have been hit really hard. So there's a lot of work being done at the moment to make sure we can allocate funding and prioritise it to address those issues.
Yeah, I mean, you would have thought, it's matching demand and supply, isn't it? And you would, yes, it takes a lot of work, but it should be capable of being done. I mean, even Michael mentioned roads. You go back to Penlink at the time here in Victoria, and that was done for a particular reason, at a particular time from an economic stimulus perspective. I mean, I was a beneficiary, of course, having a place down at Red Hill, but that's another issue. But that road was able to match economic stimulus with something that was an outstanding infrastructure result at the end of the day, by way of example. Can I move on to another question? It's from Anonymous, but it's a really, really good question, and it ties into, I think, something you said before, Claire. And the question is, what is the plan to get good collaboration and linkages to bring the local councils on the resilience journey? And what I love about this is so many of us, we tend to think of infrastructure, major projects, and if it hasn't got billions in front of it, then you don't get out of bed. But you made the point about local councils, and I think it's absolutely critical. So it'd be great to get a bit more traction on this particular issue.
Yeah, look, having gone down to those areas that were impacted by the bushfires and just seeing the requirements on them to actually deal with response and recovery at the same time, it was a huge impact. So they really need support. We need to understand the issues that they're dealing with and the impact it's had on their resourcing base and their staffing base, and support them as much as possible. So engaging with local councils through groups like If We Are and other organisations that local councils are well represented through, we will make sure that's a priority through the state infrastructure strategy. And what we're going to do is a digital strategy, so that a lot of the engagement will be online, and we will have an opportunity for councils to talk directly to us and provide their input into the strategy right throughout the process.
Thank you. Now, Rebecca, Michael, any thoughts on the local council issue?
Yeah, so we already obviously engage far and wide and extensively with our communities, and we often get some of the richest feedback from local councils, including in the area of resilience, particularly when it comes to the impacts that we have as major infrastructure on their community. Accessibility, transport links, vegetation coverage, these are all key concerns for local councils when it comes even to those, you know, multi-billion-dollar projects. And I think another step forward is the collaborative planning process the Department for Planning, Industry and the Environment announced a little while ago, which really brings council and the state planning departments together, making some of those key decisions early on.
Yeah, Marko, local government, often called the forgotten level of government for quite a good reason. I think the interesting thing from a roads perspective about local government is that they actually own about 70% of Australia's road network. And so while a lot of those might not be major routes for freight or people movement, the fact is they are national assets that need to be looked after. One of the things I'm currently doing, by the way, is I'm on the New South Wales Road Classification Board that's actually looking at taking back to the New South Wales government about 15,000 kilometres of those roads. And it's quite apparent that there's going to be some fairly significant financial issues, both money to and from councils, that will come out of that. So I guess sum it up, local governments from a roads perspective are often overlooked, but a critical player in our national road infrastructure network.
I'm glad you acknowledged that. I couldn't agree more. That's amazing. 70% of the roads. And just on that, to dig one step further, a good question here, which is, I think, an interesting segue from that, from Shannon Chisholm. And the question is, in terms of bushfire resilience and lessons learned from the 2020 megafires, is there a collaborative approach now being assessed with transport in terms of linear project capacity building and national parks/forestry, particularly in terms of expanding the unsealed pavements that are so integral to the maintenance of asset protection zones, which include utilities, as well as power supply and telcos that were impacted so easily on the New South Wales South Coast? So I think that's drilling down to a particular issue, but I think it's quite an important question. So any thoughts on that?
Look, I can offer just a brief comment, and I'm sure Claire's got lots of case evidence. One of the issues, of course, that arose over the bushfires, and it's also an issue with floods as well, is that a lot of these small communities often only have one road in and out. And so when that road was blocked by the bushfires, that meant the whole communities were trapped there. So what that raises is not only the need to look at, I guess, redundancy in terms of road linkages, but also how those roads are being maintained. And issues just like slashing verges, wider culverts, making sure that trees are actually remaining away from the road can not only ensure that the road remains open, but in an extreme situation can make sure that the road is actually able to be reopened quite quickly.
Thank you. Any other
Marko,
perspectives?
yeah, look, I think there's a huge opportunity here to demonstrate that the state government and local governments can work together. There are a huge number of timber bridges destroyed and damaged quite significantly on local roads as a result of the bushfires and the floods. A lot of the roads that go through state forests are local roads, and I know that there is a real need to provide support and an integrated response. There is an integrated response to the cleanup that's occurring at the moment, with Langarook doing a brilliant job in an integrated way to make sure there are local jobs and employment opportunities. And I think this question relates to procurement as well, and making sure that we provide an opportunity for innovative procurement that allows for local integration, local jobs, and a coordinated approach across different tiers of government, so that not only do we repair those assets that are damaged, but we do the design thinking about building back better and making sure that we're thinking through the long-term resilience and the standards that they need to be met. And that can only occur if the Commonwealth Government, the state government, and the local government are all talking to each other and agree on those standards.
Brilliant. I could not agree more. Now, to make sure that we do fit into the 1 hour we've set aside, that's all been brilliant discussions, and we have many questions, which is great to see, and they're all fantastic questions. Unfortunately, there are only so many we can answer live. Patrick, when you sum up, if you can mention whether or not, how we'll deal with all of those questions. What I'd like to do is just to throw to each of you, the panelists, just for a parting last comment before we start to close.
All right, well, I might kick off, Marko, and I think for me, what the next couple of years, if there's one thing that comes out of this, if we can all share data in an integrated way, so that the common planning assumptions that we're drawing on across different sectors and different jurisdictions, we all have this understanding around what the true impact is, and we're prepared to be quite open and transparent between government and industry, so that we get the best possible answer and solutions for the community. If we can do that and be very transparent about that data, we'll be coming a long, long way.
Yeah, and Claire, I'd just support that by going back to what I said before about the building information modelling system that the Board of Treasurers is currently have a project underway. That role of data and I guess getting a nationally consistent approach across the country is critically important. And given we've got this level of collaboration between Commonwealth and state governments at the moment, for us organisations like Roads Australia, it's a fantastic time to be pushing the, I guess, national economic and social benefits of pushing those sorts of policies.
Yeah, Michael, and you'll be pleased to hear that we do use digital engineering, including BIMs, at Sydney Metro. So hopefully make some progress towards the vision you're talking about there. From my perspective, there's two things. The first one is collaboration. There are interdependencies. We're often each other's weaknesses. And the second is community, a recognition that an integrated transport network is much, much more than a transport network. It's all about the communities we serve.
Thank you, Rebecca. Well, I might just sum up really quickly. Now, I've got to say this, I knew today's session was going to be great, but it's wonderful when something is even better than you thought it was going to be. That's been truly amazing. I think we have really teased out, or the three of you have really teased out amazing and not just theoretical but real issues in this resilience and sustainability of infrastructure space. It's been absolutely amazing. It's almost impossible for me to very quickly bottle or encapsulate what you've just said, but the things that I was hearing, just to throw them out there, a lot of were that need to integrate and collaborate. And it seems to be that that collaboration integration is across agencies within one government, across governments, and then also across modes as well. So absolutely critical to integrate and collaborate. One of the points you made in those 4 key points that you had, Rebecca, the need to do it early, not as an afterthought, not just as a provision in a tender document or a contract, but it's got to be real, and it's got to be early, and it's got to be at the time of investment decisions. And then, of course, the points made about, you know, really integrating and collaborating with stakeholder and community. Obviously, this is critical to the community, and if we didn't have communities, then none of this would really matter. One of the other points, and I think you made this in particular, Claire, was when we did CityLink in 1995, we had, I think, a one line somewhere where we were arguing about whether we were going to provide for a 30 or a 50-year flood. And I mean it. I mean, I know, I recall negotiating and drafting that. That's in 1995, and it was an afterthought. Yeah, is it a 30 or is it a 50-year or is it a 100-year flood that we're providing for? So it's quite amazing where we have come in just 25 years. But the point you were making, Claire, was it's that scenario planning that I really like, which was don't just think about things that have happened and the past hazards and, you know, the known hazards, but do that scenario planning. As we say, who would have thought in a year ago that we were going to have COVID-19? And the other point that, you know, all of you have made is data. It's absolutely critical. Data. It just as, and Michael, you were making the point, you drilled down that with data, it enables you to do real asset management, and that you can be planning for things, you can be doing predictive maintenance, etc., etc. I'm just going to make a point about BIM, and I sit on ABAB, the Australasian BIM Advisory Board. Quite frankly, it's industry needs a rev up. The response in Australia has been shitful so far, to put it mildly, and this just brings it home. How much more can be done in that space? Government has a real role to play, and is starting to with the various policies that we're seeing at a state and territory level, but we still have barely scratched the surface there. And I agree, there's so much more we can do in that space. And then just 2 points to finish before I hand over to Patrick. Michael, you made a couple of additional points about the circular economy, and interesting to see that trade-off where, in part, trade-off is often, you know, it's either whole of life or capital cost. But you're making the point that there's almost a trade-off within a whole of life cycle approach between sustainability and resilience. And you sort of say, well, okay, it's great, let's get rid of some excess plastic, but then what effect does that have on the resilience of the road, for instance, going forward? And then that final point about supply chains and the fact that the last 6 months have really brought home the need not just to look at assets and networks, but the resilience of the supply chains themselves. So with that, I would like to finish up. And thank each of you. So Rebecca, Claire, Michael, thank you so much. They have been amazing presentations, and you've really brought the issue to life. I'm now going to finish up by handing over to Quentin Crombie to close proceedings.
Thanks, Marko. Another really informative webinar, and we're really pleased with the ongoing collaboration between Roads Australia and ISCA. Many thanks to you again, Marko, for your expert moderating today. Very colourful, always enjoyable. And also to Claire, Rebecca and Michael for the fantastic contributions as well. As I think Patrick might have mentioned at the start of the webinar, we're actually going to be doing a follow-up podcast to further explore some of the issues that we covered today, as well as addressing some of the session's unanswered questions, because there were quite a few. In addition, Roads Australia and ISCA are actually discussing co-developing a policy paper on this topic, and today's discussion will really help to frame that, but more on that in due course. In the meantime, Roads Australia are going to continue delivering its program of policy webinars and other stakeholder engagement events. And this includes considering what the roads and broader transport sector might look like in a post-COVID-19 world, and the steps we can take to exploit the opportunities and mitigate threats. So just to quickly highlight a few of those, off the back of the recent federal and state funding announcements, on Wednesday, the 8th of July, we'll hold a webinar on regional road infrastructure initiatives that specifically target road safety. Later in July, we'll hold a webinar to discuss the impact that COVID-19 has had on public transport use. And this webinar will explore customer behaviour moving forward and what is needed to persuade customers to return safely and confidently to public transport. So we do hope you can join us for those events, and you can get further information from the Roads Australia website. Finally, on behalf of ISCA and Roads Australia, thank you everyone, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
Thank you, Marko. Thank you, Patrick.